I want to bring up our next speaker. The session is called Reinventing You. Not the person next to you, but reinventing you in your seat. Define your brand, imagine your future. Please welcome Dorie Clark.
So interesting. Here we go. Thank you. Started with a slide that was unexpected, but today is a day of surprises. In fact, one of the surprises, I think just as a favor to me, they've given me an opportunity to show off some lesbian credentials here, because I'm actually going to move this for you. So just wait for it, ladies. There we go. Need some clearance here to walk the stage with you all. So here's the problem with self-reinvention. Here's the problem with building your brand as an out leader. And that is, so often the experience of being a professional today feels a lot like this. In fact, probably about an hour ago, many of you were right in the thick of something very much like this. It is chaotic. It is frenetic. The average professional sends or receives 122 email messages per day. That's a study by the Radicati Group. Separately, the average professional attends 63 meetings per month, which sounds like a stunning amount, 63 meetings per month. But if you actually think about it, it breaks down to between 2 and 3 meetings per workday, which is probably about normal, right? You probably do that. Now, we know what the impact of that is on us, which is that we're busy, we're racing around. But there is also, of course, an impact on the people around us, which is, quite frankly, they don't have the time or the energy or the bandwidth to be spending that much time thinking about us or who we are or what we're capable of. Now, this impacts everybody, right? I mean, in days of yore, it used to be a pretty safe assumption that you would have a career path or a career track, and people would see your potential and you'd sort of just march forward on that if you performed reasonably well. Those assumptions, as we know, at least intellectually, have really changed. They've really been shattered in the past 10 to 20 years. In many companies now, there's not really such a clear career path or progression anymore. We often are left to fend for ourselves or to really have to be proactive, raising our hands and making sure that people get us, that they see us, that they know what we can bring to the table. Now, this is complicated. There's one extra little step that we have to face as out professionals, which is that, as you guys all know, when people are busy, when they're racing around, when they don't really have time to properly think about something, they make snap judgments. They make assumptions. They think quickly. They latch on to the first thing they see. And so for many folks, perhaps some of you, there may be some degree of concern that you don't want the only thing they think about when they think about you to be, oh, that's the gay one, that's the trans one, that's the whatever one, right? So the question that we have and that we have to answer is, how can we make sure that that can be a piece of it, but not the only piece? How can we make sure that we are seen by others the way we want to be seen, the way we ought to be seen? That's the challenge. So over the course of the past decade, I've spent a lot of time researching that. I teach for the Fuqua School of Business at Duke. I've written a number of books about it. And in fact, Yay, Out Leadership, there's a copy of one of my books which you can have. You can possess it yourself for free. And it's out in the lobby. So we have a break afterwards. And so you can feel free to grab your copy there. But I wanted in this talk to share with you some of the lessons that I've learned in the course of interviewing hundreds of successful professionals about their reinvention journeys, about how they build their brand as leaders, and spending time writing the books, writing about them for Forbes and Harvard Business Review and places like that. But first, this is very interesting what happened to these slides. So we're just going to shift it all around. This is cool. So I want to address one of the challenges that just up front, because I give a lot of these talks, like 50 a year usually, and so I know from past experience that some of you may well be thinking, okay, this sounds good intellectually, Dorie, but the problem is that no one wants to be this guy. Nobody wants to be the person that is perceived as being so all about their personal brand that they are viewed as the car salesman of their company, right? Because in the popular conversation, there's a lot of conflation of personal branding and self-promotion. And certainly there's some overlap, there's some pieces, but it's not, this is not the whole story. I think the caricature of personal branding is that it's all about shouting out to the world, here's how great I am, listen to how great I am. They also think, and this is even more salient for out professionals, there is often a lot of thought that what personal branding is trying to figure out what the world wants you to be and trying to look more like that. I would like to posit to you that actually, when it is done right, it is the converse of that. It is the exact opposite of that. Because instead, when we do it the right way, and people can sense it, they can feel it in their bones when you do it the right way, it is actually about getting perfectly clear within ourselves about who we are, about what we bring, and then making sure that people understand that. It's not about contorting ourselves to look like what other people want. It's about making sure that they grasp how valuable who we are is. So how do we do that? I mean, and why does it matter? I mean, fundamentally, it's nice, right? It's nice for us in terms of being able to feel free at work. It's nice for us in terms of being able to feel comfortable in our own skin. But it also is critically important, not just to us, but to our companies. Because when we have a strong brand as a leader, what it enables us to do is to have more influence in our company. It enables us to ensure that when we speak, people listen to us, that they take us seriously, and that the initiatives that we care about, that we've worked hard on, are the ones that get implemented. When you are respected, and when you are viewed as someone with clout, someone who is going somewhere, someone who has a name for themselves inside their company or inside their firm, that enables you to fast track your success and be more effective with everything you do. That is why this matters. Having a strong brand accelerates everything. In fact, as you will hear after the break from my friend Sylvia Ann Hewlett, it accelerates your ability to get a sponsor. She will tell you in much more depth, but just as an exciting preview, having a strong personal brand is, in fact, one of the key elements that makes you most likely to attract a powerful sponsor in your career. So thinking this through, investing in this, is one of the very best things you can do. So, just to give a little bit of history about this, this is a Fast Company cover story from 1997. It is the first time, actually, that the phrase personal brand was ever used. It was a cover story by Tom Peters. Some of you guys may be familiar with him. He is a prominent management thinker. He wrote the book In Search of Excellence, which is a big bestseller. And so this was the cover, The Brand Called You. But fundamentally, even though the phrase personal branding is 20-some years old, obviously, the concept is not 20 years old, right? What we are talking about is your reputation. And this is something that, especially when you're part of a group like the LGBT community, that sometimes likes to, that sometimes people like to project things onto, being cognizant of what our reputation is and really proactively controlling that. We can't control everything, but we can control a lot of things. And if we do that, that is a powerful way to make sure that we are not buffeted by the winds of fate, but instead are actually doing what we can to steer our careers. So from my research, from the teaching that I do at Duke Fuqua, I wanted to share with you 8 strategies. These are pieces that hopefully you guys can go home, later this week after you're done with this conference and start implementing. I want it to be as practical as possible. The first is hearkening back here to junior high math, right? Venn diagram, our friend the Venn diagram. I have always loved the Venn diagram because I think, yes, I was the captain of the Math Counts team. Thank you for asking. But the reason is that I think in many ways it's sort of poetic, right? It shows us the importance of leveraging where things overlap. I get a lot of questions when it comes to building your brand as a leader about the question of how your brand should be the same as or different from your company. And I wanted to start here because I think it's an important thing to frame from the beginning. If you were, and so I think the Venn diagram is the answer in many ways, but just to break down the pieces, if your brand was literally the exact same as your company's, if these two circles were like, an eclipse, they were the exact same thing, this may be good in some ways because, oh, wow, this person's so aligned with their company. But on the other hand, you're not actually bringing anything new. If the company didn't have you, it would probably be fine because they already have all of those ingredients. Meanwhile, if your brand and the company's brand are two completely separate circles, if they're over here, people are going to say before too long, why does he work here? Because we don't get it. Seems strange. The sweet spot, and this is an intellectual frame to guide the rest of this, is if we create a Venn diagram of our own. If you can think, okay, what are my values? What do I care about? What do I bring forward into the world? What am I good at? And how is that similar to the company? What do I have in common with my firm? What are the places where I am all in on this and people can say, yes, I see that. She's a great fit for being here. That is really powerful. It creates a sense of unity, a sense of alignment. People get it. But the secret sauce, which helps with your advancement, is also being deliberate and thinking about the part that's, oh, no, that does not allow me to point, so I won't do that. But it's also thinking about the part outside the circle. Because if you are bringing something new, something different that your company, that your firm does not possess without you. If you work for, the stodgiest firm in town, that there's value to that, right? There's trust, there's history, there's stability, there's all those things. But if you are viewed perhaps as someone who brings a unique dose of creativity or innovation or whatever, those are coveted things as well. Most companies want a little bit of that. That's the spice. And so if you're able, within the context of being a team player with your company, to have that and to bring that, does make you uniquely valuable. That's just one of an infinitude of examples. So finding your sweet spot, understanding where you fit in the Venn diagram is first. Now, second, this is actually a woman that I profiled in Reinventing You, the book that Out Leadership kindly is giving you. Her name is Libby Wagner. And the reason that I profiled her, I loved her story. In American culture, there are long-standing myths, about, the old story about the management consultant who gets burned out, who gets tired out, and they decide to run off and become a poet. We all know stories like that. It's part of our kind of cultural ethos. But what I liked about Libby's story, it's a little bit man bites dog. She was a poet who actually ran off and became a management consultant. And the beauty of this, you can imagine, it is actually much harder to do that than the reverse. You know, everybody can sort of imagine, like, oh, well, the management consultant, they always wanted to be a poet, and blah, 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 blah. Well, you know, with Libby, a poet becoming a management consultant, people say, what the F does she know about that? you know, there's this credibility barrier, and she felt it. She felt it keenly. She knew she could do it. She knew she would do a good job, but she also was keenly aware that people might be judging her and that they might think that she was lacking. And so for the first few years of her business, she hid it. She did not tell anybody that she had been a poet. She literally just tried to keep it on the DL. And, you know, it worked okay, but the truth is, she seemed kind of average because she didn't have a lot to really talk about if she hadn't been talking about all the things that she had spent her life up to that point doing. All she could talk about was books that she had read, or, you know, the things everybody else was talking about. But slowly, as she got more experience, she became a little bit more comfortable, she realized, you know, maybe it's not such a bad thing. And she started coming out as a poet and telling people about it. And over time, just slowly, she eventually created an email newsletter, and she called it The Boardroom Poet. She tested the waters, and people actually seemed interested. They seemed to like it. And so today, Libby is fully out of the closet, and she actually does leadership retreats for leaders using literature. They actually read books together, and then they use literature as kind of a prism through which to talk about their challenges as executives. So it's become a cornerstone of what she does. But I think it's an important lesson for all of us, that in the beginning, we may think that the thing about us that's different is a weakness, but actually, if we claim it, if we position it correctly, it can become a strength. It can become the differentiator that makes us uniquely valuable, which ties into a story that I also share in Reinventing You, which is about this woman. She's a friend of mine. Her name is Toby Johnson. As you can probably extrapolate here, Toby was in the Army. She was an Apache helicopter pilot, one of the very first women to ever hold that position. And at a certain point, she had to make a choice. She was 7 years into her service. She had to decide, was she going to be a lifer in the military, or was she going to return to civilian life? And eventually she decided, okay, I'm gonna try something different. I'm gonna go back, and I want to try to get a corporate job. So she went to business school. She figured that would be kind of a good pivot for her. So she was all in on that. And she knew, right, if any of you have gone to business school, you know, a very critical element of your business school experience is where you do your summer internship. Because if you get a good internship and then you do well, you'll probably get a job offer, and so then your path is paved, right? But what she didn't know, the one piece that somehow had eluded her, because it is rather counterintuitive, is that interviews for the summer internships start in the fall semester of your first year of business school. She had been on campus 6 weeks, and summer recruiting had already started. And so she somehow needed to convince these people to hire her. Toby, though, she'd only ever had one employer, and that was the US Army. And so, let's be honest, she had a lot more experience than most of her classmates. They had gone to undergrad, they worked a couple years in a corporation, relatively low-level stuff, and then they came back to B school. But when the recruiters asked them questions about, well, what's your leadership experience with blah, 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 they had a very nice, pat story they could tell. It made sense. Toby had been in Iraq. Toby had been in charge not just of managing, but in charge of the lives of 30 people in battlefield conditions. And the stories that she told, they were amazing stories. But the recruiters didn't know how to make sense of them. They said, thank you for your service. But they didn't know how it really translated into financial services or consumer packaged goods or tech or insurance. Because they said, well, she can fly a helicopter, right? Now, the truth is, of course, Toby's story is not a story about a woman who can fly a helicopter. Toby's story is a story that at the end of the day is about leadership. And leadership is an eminently transferable skill. But the recruiters, because they have 122 emails and because they have 63 meetings, they're not necessarily going to see it that way. They are not necessarily going to connect the dots for you. It is our job. It is incumbent on us to tell that story. We have to craft our own narrative. If we know nothing else as LGBT professionals, what we need to understand is that if we let other people tell our stories, we will lose. We need to craft the story. We need to tee that up so it is self-evident to them. And once she got that, and once she started telling the story about leadership and framing it in that way, then people got it. Then people understood. Oftentimes, there's the surprising thing is often not a lot of pushback. It's not like people are oppositional, usually. It's just that they don't see it themselves. We need to give them the layup, and then they say, oh, okay, that makes sense. But we need to do that legwork in telling our own stories and crafting our own narrative. So that's crucial. Now, number 4, I wanted to share this story with you. This is a local story. One of the hats that I wear besides my speaking and my teaching is I do consulting and executive coaching. And one of the organizations that I worked for a few years back was not too far from here in Manhattan. It was Mount Sinai Hospital. And I was consulting for them. I got to meet this guy. His name is Lenny Achon. And Lenny at the time was the chief communications officer for the hospital. And the interesting thing about Lenny, everybody was buzzing about this guy when I was first consulting there. And everyone's like, oh, have you met Lenny? And he was an object of fascination because at the time that I was working with him, he was 35 years old and he was the chief communications officer. And this is a guy who had risen fast. But the even more interesting thing was he had not started in PR. He had not started in marketing. He had not started in branding. His background was that he was a nurse. How does a nurse get to be the chief communications officer for the hospital by age 35? That was an interesting question. And so finally one day I asked him, I said, Len, how did you do that? And what he told me I thought was so interesting. I actually ended up writing a piece based in part on it for the Harvard Business Review. And what he told me was this. Right after the iPhone came out, there's a little pause a little bit later, a year or two later, and the iTunes store came out, right? And you were able to start having apps. Lenny became fascinated by this. This was just his hobby. He liked tech. He thought it was cool. And he got it in his head that maybe he wanted to try to create an app. Now, this was not his background. He didn't know how to do it, but he's a smart guy. He said, you know what, I can figure it out. I can figure out how to hire somebody to create an app. And he had some ideas for it. So he did. He went on one of the Upwork sites or whatever and found some coders, and he actually did it. He ended up creating 2 different apps that went up for sale in the iTunes store. So this is all just his hobby, things he did in his spare time. But you know what? Word travels, right? And so one day his boss calls him into the office and says, Lenny, I want to talk to you. I heard you created some iPhone apps. And Lenny thought, oh no, oh no. Did I violate a company policy that I didn't know about? Does he think I've been misusing company resources? He had this moment of panic. But it turned out it was actually the opposite. His boss said, well, we need someone to run social media for the hospital. I think it should be you. He saw Lenny's initiative, what he did in his free time, what he did when no one was looking, when he could have done anything, when he could have been watching Game of Thrones. This is what he did. And so they gave him the job of heading up social media for the hospital. And in fact, he did such a good job that within a few months, they gave him the entire communications portfolio. That is how he got to be the 35-year-old chief communications officer. So for all of us, I think one of the questions that we can ask about building our brand, it's not just what we do during the workday, it's also how can we harness our other interests? How can we harness our curiosity? In no way did Lenny think that building an iPhone app would even be relevant to his career. But it turned out it was. And in many ways, the time that we invest in side projects can turn out to be quite valuable for our career progression. Now, number 5 comes from the research of a gentleman named Ronald Burt, who is a sociologist at the University of Chicago. And he is an expert in what is known as network theory. And network theory is actually really interesting. It is really, I would argue, quite valuable for anyone who works inside of an organization, especially a large company. And fundamentally what it is the study of what makes someone indispensable in a network. Right? If we ever have flickers in our mind about our job security or our career security or how am I going to progress, one of the very best things that we can actually do is to try to answer the question, well, how can I make myself indispensable? If you can answer that, that actually clears the pathway. So here's what Ronald Burt discovered after doing analyses of millions of data points, millions of interactions between employees at large companies. Who's calling who, who's meeting who, who's emailing who. They crunched the numbers. This is big data at its finest. And what they discovered is this, that most people, for the vast majority of employees, their social networks look very much like this. Right? They are the little dot over here. For many people, most people, this may be sufficient, but let me tell you, it will never make you indispensable. For most people, they're talking to a handful of people. That's it. They're talking to their boss. They're talking to maybe the people on their team. Maybe they're talking to the person whose cubicle or office happens to be next to theirs. That's about it. They are in a pleasant rut. You're not going to become indispensable that way. The people who are most valuable, who are rated and evaluated by their companies as being most valuable, actually had social networks that looked much more like this, which is that they were at the center of networks. They were talking to all kinds of disparate people, disparate groups. And the reason that this was so valuable, it turns out, is that in any large organization, what almost inevitably happens is that silos form, right? This office isn't really talking to this office. This department isn't really talking to that department. But the truth is, if they did, it would actually be helpful, right? There's so much reinventing of the wheel that goes on in corporate life. And if people just had the conversations, if they just knew that, oh, those guys over there actually tried that last year, maybe we should talk to them and see what happened and what worked and what didn't. If you do that, you're able to speed things up, make it more efficient, make it more effective. If you develop a reputation over time in your company as being the person who knows how to do that, the person who seems to know everyone, seems to know a little bit about everything, this becomes enormously valuable to your brand. I will tell you an easy way. This might sound, oh my God, how can I do that? Let me give you just one possible suggestion. I have a friend that used to work for a large hospital system. And she decided, she didn't have a ton of time, but she had some. So she said, you know what, I'm going to spend an hour a week on networking. And her commitment was that she decided that she would invite a different person from a different department out to lunch once a week. That was it. It's not hard, right? You have to eat lunch anyway. But most people just don't make the effort to do it, a small amount of effort. But if you can imagine over time the impact of, over the course of a year, spending time with 50 different people spread throughout your organization, and frankly, many of you are working for multinationals, you could even do this with people over Skype. You could have like a Skype brown bag, Or you could be, even if it's just in your own office, you could be talking, if you're an IP person, you could talk to the litigation people, whatever. There's a lot of possibilities. But you become aware, sort of this peripheral awareness of who knows who, of projects, of who's working on what. Think about how valuable it would be if there's a question, if there's a problem, if something is stuck in the process, and you're able to pick up the phone and someone's actually willing to help you, that gets noticed over time. Number 6, so that's talking about peripheral connections, the kind of weak ties that the sociologist Mark Granovetter talks about. But I want to talk about something a little bit deeper right now. This is a woman named Phillippi Ryan, and I got to know her a number of years ago. We actually met in a writing class. And the way that she came to be in this writing class, Hank was a television newscaster. If any of you are from Boston, she's very well known in Boston. She's been on the air for 30 plus years. She's an investigative reporter. But the reason she ended up in this writing class is that this young woman who actually started as her intern, eventually got hired on staff and worked with her, but started as her intern, 30 years younger than Hank. She had a side hobby. And this young woman had a side hobby of writing. And so she wrote a novel. And one day she asked Hank, she said, hey, will you do me a favor? I've written this novel. I'm trying to get it published. Would you mind reading it and offering me your feedback? And of course, Hank loved her and said, yeah, of course, I'm happy to do that. She takes the manuscript home over the weekend to read it. And Hank told me when I interviewed her for my book, she said, it's like that Zen saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Because ultimately, when Hank was thinking about her own life goals, she had always wanted to write too. In fact, that's why she became an investigative reporter, was that when she was young, she was so into mystery novels. She loved solving crimes and fighting the bad guys. But she had never really thought it was realistic to be a writer. But seeing that this young woman, her former intern, could write a book, she realized, you know what, I can do that too. So she signs up for the writing class where I meet her. And within a few years, she has actually published more than half a dozen mystery novels and has won almost all the awards, the Agatha Christie Award, the McCavity Award, all the awards in the mystery field. But it became something she knew she could do through the inspiration of this young woman. Now, so often there is talk in the corporate world about the importance of mentorship, and Sylvia is gonna blow that all up. She's forget a mentor, find a sponsor. So sponsors are very important. You will hear all about that. When we think about mentorship, typically the sort of archetypal image is the mentor is someone who's older, who's wiser, kind of steers you along. That's fantastic, of course, if you can have that. I mean, a sponsor is even better. But if you can have an older mentor, great. But the truth is, people are busy, right? We'd all love to have some powerful person helping us out, but oftentimes they've got their own deal. And they've got 20 people, 50 people that would like to be in that same position. We don't all get a mentor like that. It'd be great if it happened, but it doesn't always. And so we could just throw up our hands and say, well, I guess I don't get one. But what I would suggest instead is that we think more expansively. That we begin to say, you know what, let me form my own mentor board of directors. Instead of looking for this one perfect person we want to emulate, instead, can we come up with the idea of a collection of people, 3 people, 5 people, 8 people, that they may be senior folks, they may also be our peers, they may even be junior to us, they may even be our former interns. And they don't have to represent everything you want to be professionally, but they maybe have a particular skill, particular aptitude, a characteristic, something you want to learn from. Just like Hank got inspired to write thanks to the example of her former intern. We can all begin to ask ourselves, who should be on our mentor board of directors? Who do we want to learn from? Number 7, find your wingwoman. Wingman works too, but I thought this was just too cool of a picture, so I had to put that on here. So this strategy actually comes from some research from Robert Cialdini, the eminent influence researcher, emeritus professor at Arizona State University, and Jeffrey Pfeffer, professor at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. They did some research into self-promotion, and they discovered 2 key pieces of information. The first is something we all know intuitively, which is that if other people perceive you as someone who brags about yourself, blah, 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 they are going to tune out really fast. Nobody likes that. It is boring. But the very interesting corollary, the part that most people don't necessarily think about or don't necessarily realize, is that they ran this experiment, and it turns out that if someone else says literally those exact same things about you, other people will listen eagerly and be fascinated and say, oh my God, this person sounds amazing, I have to meet them, right? There is enormous value in having this third-party validation, somebody else saying great things about you. And of course, this happens accidentally sometimes, right? Somebody's just going to say, somebody comes up and says something nice about you to your boss. That's fantastic. But what I would like to posit to you guys, you can even perhaps try it out here at this conference, but you can use it in the future, is in advance of going to the next conference, the next networking event, the next cocktail party, whatever it is, you find somebody that, now this is key, right? They have to be somebody that you like, that you respect, that you trust, that you would not hesitate to promote. But you go to this person and you say, hey, let's make a pact. At this event, I will talk you up if you talk me up. I will look for opportunities for you to help you meet the people you want to meet if you do the same for me. Basically, this is the perfect thing, especially if you were somebody that gets nervous about the idea of personal branding or self-promotion. This is your ticket, people, because it is outsourcing the process. And it turns out it's more effective for everybody. So think about who your wingman or your wingwoman might be. And I am going to conclude this last point. We'll have a minute or two for questions if anybody has them afterwards. So be ready, be cogitating. But the last of the 8 strategies that I promised you, bagels versus croissants. Now, this is not, contrary to popular opinion, advice about your breakfast choices, although I did see some out here. This is actually about something far deeper. In my second book, Stand Out, I actually profiled a colleague of mine. His name is Robbie Samuels, openly trans guy, great speaker. And he developed a methodology that I thought was terrific, which he calls bagels versus croissants. And I like to share it because I think it is something that deserves a little bit more attention. Oftentimes in the discourse about diversity and inclusion and things like that, as it should be, there's a lot of discussion about these sort of big things. Well, do we have enough representation of this group, or how are we creating the official climate for different people? Those are important conversations. But I would also like to say that there's a way of looking at it more granularly as well. And it's something that we can all do and that we can all influence. And that is this. What Robbie discovered, and I think you'll probably note it as well, whenever there's a group of people gathering, a group of 3 or more people talking, almost always what happens, naturally, is that they get into a tight little circle. Oh, hey, we have this little circle, we're talking. Now, that's fine for those 3 people, but it becomes a problem for anybody else who wants to join them because, well, how do you join them? The only option is you have to go tap, tap, tap. Oh, hi, can I join you? Which feels a little embarrassing, and you are not going to do it if you don't know the people, right? It's a way that people feel excluded, not based on their identity or anything like that, but just at a really fundamental level. If you're in a room and you don't know anyone, and you feel like, oh, they all know each other, they're all friends, that is not a way to be welcomed. If we say we want more perspectives, if we say we want more opinions and more voices at the table, literally, something as small as the way we stand can make a difference. And so what Robbie suggests instead is that we can try it today, we should all try to be cognizant of standing instead in a croissant so that we always have an opening, so that there is always room for new people to come in and join us. We can create inclusivity literally with our bodies, with how we stand, with how we welcome people. I mean, you all, I'm sure, can think back to summer camp, can think back to junior high, when you weren't making Venn diagrams and thinking about the lunchroom and whatever, when you didn't really know who to talk to, you didn't know who to sit with. It's kind of an awful feeling, and it's not one we want to replicate as adults. And so if we can all be a little bit more croissant-like and a little less bagel-y, it's something that we can do. It's a small gesture that we can do to include others, and in fact, it redounds to the benefit of our brand. Because how grateful is somebody when you make them feel welcome? That is one of the best things, in fact, for all of us to be known for. So I have concluding thoughts. We can wrap it all up. Before we do, I think we have time maybe just for one or two quick questions, if anybody has them. Oh, yes, right in the front, it looks like. Why don't we wait for the mic for you, and let's, oh, no, completely untrue. Okay, mic man is, all right. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. So, all right, let's start with you, and then we'll go to the gentleman.
She was first.
Thank you. On your point 5, making yourself indispensable and the network, I fully agree. But I also sometimes find you don't come across authentic and you're just trying to build networks for the sake of building a network. So how do you ensure that you're coming across authentic and you're actually trying to get to know somebody or trying to make a connection versus just adding another person into your toll?
Right, great, thank you. How do you appear genuine in what you're doing and not like the person who's just like collecting another business card, right? I think this is really important. One of the, I wrote an ebook actually called Standout Networking, and one of the points that I make in it, which I think is really critical, is I'm a big fan of networking. I mean, even the name kind of makes some people feel uncomfortable because they're like, networking, and so if it makes you feel better to think, whatever. I don't care about the terminology. Fundamentally, networking is relationship building. Relationship building is networking. But relationship building probably, I think, better conveys what we're after, which is that it's not about a quick hit. So 2 principles that I live by and like to try to suggest for all of us. Number 1, networking, meeting people should never be about the quick hit. This is in no way, like if people are like, oh, I need more business, I should go network, right? I should go to a networking event. That is literally the worst thing you can possibly do, because if you think that you're going to get business in a week, in 30 days, in 6 months from that relationship, it's not going to work. Because people are socially attuned, right? And they are going to smell the sharkiness. They're going to smell the need, right? And so instead, the way that I think about networking is this is about how you build business for yourself in 10 years, right? It's not about the $1,000 sale next week. It's about the $10 million sale in 10 years, because you do business with your friends. And the question is, how do you make somebody a friend? I have another rule for myself too, which I've written about in the Harvard Business Review, which is that when I meet somebody, I don't ask them for a favor for a year. Now, this is like, a little rule of thumb. You can bend it if you become like super besties or if it's easy or whatever. But, I've met people sometimes, and like, the day after I meet them, they're like, oh, hi, Dorie, great to meet you. Hey, can you introduce me to your editor at blah, blah, blah magazine? Hey, I looked on LinkedIn and I see you're connected to insert famous person. Can you introduce me to that person? And it's just like, oh my God, it's like tacky, it's tacky. And so you don't want to do that. It is about the long game. And as long as we think about that, you are not looking for a damn thing for 1 to 10 years. What you are looking for is a friend. If you can make that person a friend, you don't even have to ask for business. They will want to give you business. You will want to give them business. It is about creating a relationship that is extraordinarily fruitful over time. If we can go in with that attitude of zero neediness and genuine interest about could this person be a friend, then I think that's how we become successful. So thank you for that. Gentleman in the back, let's go to you.
Hey, friend. My name is Billy. I'm with Ogilvy. I was just interested, over the course of your career, in what ways have you seen your brand shift the most dramatically, and in what ways have you seen it stay the same?
Nice. Very philosophical, William. I like it. So for me personally, I will say part of it is, what the areas of emphasis that we have over time certainly shift. To give, just one example, originally when I started my business, which is now 13 years ago, my kind of official thing was I did marketing strategy consulting. So I worked doing marketing for corporations or for organizations of various stripes. In 2013, I wrote my first book, Reinventing You, which you get, although you get the new edition, yay. But once I started doing that, it was kind of interesting because that is a book that basically is applying corporate marketing strategies to individuals. And so as a result of that, I started getting a lot of inquiries from people about like, hey, do you do coaching? Do you do like executive coaching? And at first I was just saying like, no, no, I don't do that, because I didn't think of myself as doing that. That wasn't my thing. But eventually enough people actually asked me that I realized like, oh, this is actually stupid. I really should do that thing. And so now I actually do executive coaching. It's kind of a large piece of my business. But it's sometimes, like in some ways, the brand in your head is a lagging indicator, and you sometimes need to take cues and be flexible enough and be open. If other people keep being interested in a certain thing that you're doing or a certain facet of who you are, it's like over time, it can be useful to say, oh, maybe they're onto something. Maybe they see something that I don't, and then you can lean into that. So I think that flexibility has been helpful. So thank you for that. So I'll just say briefly, because we're getting a break very soon, so I don't want to interfere with that. We used to, until very recently, frankly, live in a world where in the corporate environment, what was prized was conformity, right? We all know that. But more and more, as we enter this increasingly, every minute, more competitive, global, fast-moving environment, people understand, the smartest companies certainly understand that if everyone is thinking the same, that creates blind spots, that creates the ability for massive collective failures of understanding and an inability for people to actually see what needs to be seen. It's the people who have different backgrounds and different perspectives who become uniquely valuable because they enable you to unearth new ideas, new opportunities, and see some of the places where you might actually otherwise have some challenges and can prevent catastrophes. So there is true value in what we bring that is different and unique, and we can't shy away from that. So today we've talked about 8 different strategies that you can apply. Obviously, you don't have to do all of them. This is not something where none of it works unless you do all of it. That would be a little bit overwhelming. This is a smorgasbord, and you can choose. And so my question for you, if there's 1 or 2 stories or ideas that resonated, what will you do differently moving forward? If you pick 1 or 2 and execute on that, those themselves can actually lead to dramatically different results in terms of how you're seen, how you're perceived, and your ability to influence effectively within your company. So it has been a pleasure speaking with you. I believe, is there someone coming up on stage? Is Mark coming up on stage to tell you more details about your exciting break? Thank you very much, and take care.